So obviously we've come out of, well, we're coming out of a difficult period, Anne, and I know you're based in Donegal there, and I'm based in Belfast, but cover the whole of Northern Ireland. And how do you find with your clients? I suppose as we went into lockdown the first time round, what sort of things were you hearing from them, and how did you cope with that, and how did they cope with that?
Uh-huh. Well, as you probably know, Peter, I'm not with Community Finance Ireland as long as yourself, so I'm kind of coming in to work with clients just in 2021. But the clients I have touched base with, they're delighted to see the change here in the Republic of Ireland in terms of the COVID restrictions lifting. I know in the north you are a wee bit ahead of ourselves. You've had your vaccine rollout. It's going a lot faster than ours is. You seem to have not as much supply issues in terms of COVID that we have. But any of the clients that I'm speaking with, and like yourself, I cover quite a broad area. I cover all of Connacht and Donegal. But, for an example, like it's community centres, football clubs, GA clubs, enterprise centres that I'm seeing, and they're only too delighted to get their doors back open, get their staff back in. And I suppose summer's coming as well, and it's a nice time of the year. It kind of feels hopeful. And just in terms of the vaccine rollout, the hope is coming with that. Obviously, people are very mindful, I suppose, first and foremost, of protecting their staff to make sure that they're coming back to a safe place to work. And then their second concern then is probably operationally, how do we go about opening here in a safe way? I think at the back of our minds, and no doubt your clients are the same, it's always, would there be another wave? Will these vaccinations work? And what if that does happen? I suppose a lot of them have learned pivoting themselves from what experiences they have. It probably come through the worst of it, I think. And if anything like that did happen again, a lot of them probably would be operationally probably better placed to know what to do if they had to change. But I suppose the biggest thing I see is the recovery itself. How will they operate in terms of income? And that's their biggest concern. Would you find your clients are the same?
Yeah, well, I suppose I was here in March last year whenever the lockdown came in, and I suppose not only was it new for our clients, but it was new for ourselves as well in terms of how we react. And I suppose one of our key mantras is that we want to be empathetic to our clients, and we want to deal with them with integrity and fairness and get close to them and understand them. And I suppose as soon as lockdown came, I suppose one of the first tasks really we had was to make contact with all of our clients. And obviously a lot of the banks were offering a 3-month repayment holiday. And the clients would have come on asking, would we be able to facilitate something similar? So I suppose whenever we got those requests, well, we didn't wait for them. We went out and we were proactive and spoke to the clients. And I suppose tried to get a feel for the impact that COVID was having on their income streams. And in many cases, their income streams stopped. But for those of them that had community halls or those local enterprises that you talked about, they still had overheads that needed to be covered. So the income had stopped, but some of the costs were still continuing. And I suppose in the north here, there were a number of different cushions, for want of a better term, that many of them availed of. Some of them availed of the furlough scheme, those that employed staff. Some availed of bounce back loans that the government again made available up to 50,000, and others availed of various grant schemes that were in play in the industry, like the social enterprise grant scheme or the charity grant scheme, both of which incidentally we were involved in administering. So I think with that and with ourselves providing a repayment holiday, they've been able to struggle through. And I suppose something I've seen in this sector is that it's very resilient, and those that are involved in it are determined not to let anything cause them to waver. But I mean, obviously things like fundraising, income from the letting of units kind of dried up. and even things like childcare facilities where key workers were able to leave their children in because of the social distancing. It meant that the ratios obviously were greatly reduced. Therefore, they needed more staff to cope with the numbers. So it was kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
That was really difficult. Now that we're kind of coming out of it, most of our clients are actually back on track and repaying their loans again. In fact, most of them only took the 3-month break that they were given, which is great to see. And I've just seen a resilience and determination to succeed that has been unbelievable. But we know that whilst we're coming out of it, there will be legacy issues there, and in a lot of cases, the cash flow has been diminished, the reserves have been diminished, and so we know that that's going to be challenging, which is why we thought there was a need for this recovery fund that we're going to launch. And again, I think the big strength of Community Finance Ireland is our ability to be empathetic, to understand the business, to understand the sector, and in every case, actually go out and actually physically meet the client in their own environment, not just over the phone, not just by email, but actually to go out. I was going to say press the flesh. That's not possible at the moment, but
that's true, yeah.
To meet them on their own premises, get a feel for how the organisation is run, and then hopefully provide them with the finance that they need to enable them to recover. So yeah, it's been a challenging time, but as you say, just as the sun is shining today, there's a bit of light coming, I think.
And I think, like any of the clients that I've been speaking with, they don't know how they stand just yet. It's very, very early days, but I suppose when they get a few months over them in terms of income streams and get their head around, how they go forward and what their possibilities are, if they have to, I suppose, maybe pivot what they do in some way, then I think they will know exactly what it is they need. Some of the people I'm working with at the minute, it's a bit unclear, which is absolutely to be expected. But let's hope, I suppose, that this recovery loan that we are going to offer will be a solution, even like in the short term, just to keep the doors open and give them that support that they fully need to continue to roll out the services that many of these great organisations we work with, that they can continue to become successful. I think that's one of the things that we've seen throughout COVID was, the social enterprise sector, the voluntary sector, community organisations, they're the absolute cornerstone of our society, and how they operate and how they build capacity and meet so many needs of our communities. I think it's impressive, and I hope at government level too that sector is getting the recognition that it deserves, because there's no possible way that I think government in Northern Ireland or Southern Ireland would have ever have met that need that's being fulfilled by our communities. It's unbelievable, and it's only to be admired, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think the very fact of the pandemic, there was unseen costs that businesses had never encountered before, like PPE equipment and laptops for staff for those that didn't have them, to enable them to Zoom from home. And we encountered terms like Zoom that we'd never heard of before. And, it is a resilient sector, dominated largely by volunteers, and a lot of the volunteers obviously are older folks.
That's right.
They are some of the most vulnerable. So, they feel nervous about coming out and engaging. But, we saw things like food banks, etc., opening up, and community halls and hubs being used for that to serve the community. And just stand back and admire what has been achieved against all the odds. And so, it's a great sector.
So Peter, you're obviously with Community Finance Ireland longer than I have been. So tell us, how have your clients faced the challenges of COVID-19?
Yeah, well, I suppose fair to say straight up, it hasn't been easy, and because it's not a space that any of us have been in before. And we do have a wide variety of clients, but the nature of the people we deal with ranges from, sports clubs. That could be a GAA club, it could be a soccer club, it could be a cricket club, faith-based, which obviously are churches, childcare groups, and local enterprises. Those are just some of the types of organisations we deal with. I suppose COVID brought its own particular challenges to each of those groups. If I think of one example of a client of mine based in rural County Fermanagh in Kesh, and I suppose it was an organisation set up as a spin-off from the local parish church that had already in its own right had been providing things like food banks and counselling, Christians Against Poverty, was financial advice for those that are struggling with debt. And a new organisation was set up as a charity and a limited company by guarantee, which just opened about 6 months before COVID kicked in. And I suppose the centre was buzzing. It had a small cafe. It had health and well-being programs that were being delivered a couple of times a week. It had farm classes. It had life groups. It had stitching classes, sewing classes.
A great all-round.
All of a sudden, within 6 months, that kind of ground to a halt. They had a number of dedicated volunteers that kind of built up the community cohesion, that shared the vision of the courthouse. But that kind of stopped. The income from the cafe stopped. Any income that there may have been from the classes stopped. And I suppose what really took off whenever those things stopped was the food bank. A number of the local councils were very proactive in terms of providing food hampers for those that were particularly in need, and the courthouse were able to come in on the back of that. They had a list of families of almost 400 families that they were able to help. They had a red, amber, green calling list for those that red, obviously, who were most in need. And so they became heavily involved in that, and were able to support the community in that way. But apart from that, obviously, there were other sources of funding available in terms of bounce back loans, in terms of grants, and we were involved in the grant program. First of all, social enterprise grant, and we worked very closely with Social Enterprise NI, and then in the charity grant, we worked very closely with NICFA. So we were involved in both those programs, and between those two grants, we put out almost £20 million of funding into the sector through the Department for Communities. So there was that, and then obviously a number of our clients, we were able to grant them a loan repayment holiday for 3 months mostly, just to give them a bit of breathing space and let them gather their thoughts, get together and see what the future held. But the reality is, because of the community and voluntary sector, things like fundraising were off the table. The income stream from many sort of retail efforts, again, was stopped. But in many cases, they had other costs like PPE equipment and all that goes with that. Social distancing caused its own issues, but they still had ongoing costs to keep buildings in a state of repair. So whenever they did open again, they weren't faced with a large repair bill. So yeah, there were loads of challenges there, but it's a resilient sector, a sector that pulls together, particularly in the tightly knit rural situations like Kesh and parts of the world that perhaps the communities are very close, very reliant on each other, and determined to succeed and not to let COVID or anything else deter them in their goals.
Okay. Yeah, I've encountered, I suppose, just at the outset here of this role, some challenges some of my clients are facing. But it's interesting because with every, I suppose, disruption comes opportunity. And there's a group that I'm working with in Galway called Let's Talk Galway, who are a volunteer. We started as a volunteer counselling service, and I think they're facilitating something like 1,200 appointments per month. Now, we all know that the fallout probably from COVID is going to be massively impacting the mental health sector. So it's really exciting, I suppose, to be involved with projects like that, the facilities that they're providing are invaluable. I suppose, to the community of Galway and surrounding areas. And then there's like other, I suppose, sectors that I'm dealing with, or other social enterprises. For example, there's like the IRD set up in Kilchama, and they're like one of those enterprise hubs. And again, I suppose it's a positive thing. Some of the experiences they're having are positive in terms of they're getting demand for people who want to move out of the cities like Dublin, maybe Galway itself as well, and move more rurally and take up a space in an office that allows them to work remotely from where they originally started, probably in the bigger cities. So yeah, with COVID and its challenges, there's always opportunity as well. So hopefully this recovery loan that we're about to launch will be able to help those types of organisations excel and propel forward. So that's something I'm really looking forward to, is getting more involved with those types of organisations and community groups.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing, I mean, we have a number of clients in the faith-based sector. Another one, a little place called Ahove, just outside Listonskea in County Fermanagh, and a long-established church with a lot of older parishioners. So I suppose the challenge there was, and they've responded very well, is to try and get their income streams under standing order rather than hard cash, which makes life a lot easier. And they've been able to transfer people from giving by cash or by check and get them tapped into standing order where the money comes directly into the bank. Because again, in an older church like that, an older building, there are maintenance fees to be paid, there's repairs to be done. So, and a lot of those older folks are very vulnerable, and therefore the slowest to come back, even after they've had both their injections, which most of them have by now, they're still quite reluctant to come out.
Yeah.
And again, Ahabrak Community Association in the heart of County Tyrone, just outside Strabane, they had a number of units that were let out, and again, because of the nature of the tenants, the rental income stream from that basically was cut off. The hall had to be run under the government regulations in terms of social distancing, etc. So again, the income stream dried up. They were able to get involved with local food box distribution through the Department for Communities, so they were able to keep going, and those volunteers that were able to come out and did that. So that was really, really good. But again, it comes back to the fact that we don't lose sight of the fact that the income streams stopped. We had to respond to that in terms of getting to know the business, getting to know the reasons why the income stream stopped. And I think apart from the grants they've already received, apart from the bounce back loans that they've availed of in some cases, the recovery fund that we're about to launch, as you say, Anne, provides a great opportunity for us to get out, to get close to the businesses, make sure we're happy their income streams are back on board and that they're robust. We talked about cash flow earlier, that the cash flow is robust, that is sustainable, and that they're not just going to be relying going forward on grant income, but they have a sustainable income stream. So I think it's very timely, and I think groups will respond well to it, hopefully. And I'm excited to get back out and about again and actually meet those behind the enterprises. We've looked back a lot at the impacts of COVID and how communities have managed during COVID, and a lot of that's been, I suppose, quite negative in many ways. But I suppose every cloud has a silver lining, and I'm sure you've seen in your time with Community Finance Ireland that you've seen some things change for the better for yourself and indeed for the clients that you deal with. So, how do you think things have changed for the better?
I suppose I can speak from personal experience. I wouldn't say this to too many people, but I think in some ways there was more positives for me personally out of COVID. Thankfully, I have been lucky enough not to lose any family members or so far, or no one has become really sick, and I'm really, really grateful for that. But on a personal level, the time aspect that I have experienced, life was just so busy up until COVID. Like, for example, my kids are involved in a lot of sport. I would have been working full time. and I still am with Community Finance Ireland. But I think the time factor, the slowing everything down and really appreciating what you've got around you has kind of helped me. Like, I suppose during COVID, one of the only things that you could actually do, because we had big restrictions here in the Republic, we weren't allowed to go too far, was kind of getting outdoors and appreciating what you've got on your doorstep. And the whole working remotely, I struggled with that for years, and there was loads of opportunities I would have come across, but they just weren't doable from Donegal. But I think that need to be, that presenteeism of in an office in a city somewhere has now been, I suppose, catapulted forward by about 10 years. So that's brought loads of opportunity to rural areas, which is great, I think. And I see that sort of replicated around the country, and particularly within my geography. And I also think, like, I'm in a community centre today, you know, as we chat, and I know that 2 of the workers in this community centre are doing their work remotely, and that is now acceptable. Why we never thought of it before, I suppose we didn't need to. COVID kind of amplified the remote working possibilities. And as I was sort of preparing for this today, I was kind of thinking of, you know, that we all know, and you'll have come across much more than I have, the volunteers within certain community centres, and they would be falling into vulnerable sectors, but they can now do some of their work, especially like the governance piece and the compliance piece. Like, a lot of that kind of work can be done remotely, and it can be done in the safety of their own home. So I'm hoping, you know, the community groups that we're involved with, that they get that benefit as well. So I think in some respects, it has made us take a break and sit back and reflect on what is life all about? If it's a rat race all the time, you know, you don't enjoy it. You don't have time for your own hobbies. And like my kids, I know a lot of kids were kind of very bored and stuff during COVID. I was probably lucky enough that they weren't. My 2 were outside most of the time because the weather was particularly good in last year's lockdown. Just that time and the ability to appreciate what you've got and slow the whole thing down and just enjoy life a wee bit more. But I'm probably unique in that situation. What about yourself? Like, what I suppose, what would you say the positives and the negatives of COVID, or even maybe the clients that you are working with? What would you say they are?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and I think it has caused a lot of people, if not everybody, to sit back, reflect, take stock on work-life balance and how they're actually spending their time, and probably to appreciate what they have on their own doorstep. As you say, you know, as I walk through our own small village, you know, I see volunteers out now that are planting stuff on the main street, that are getting involved, and I sense much more of a community spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably COVID has taught us that we're not islands. We all impact on each other. We all need each other. We need that sense of community, and I think that's just great to see. I think the blended working and the working from home, and as you say, you're in a community centre today. I've seen, I suppose, for the last couple of years, a number of clients that have kind of created office space for people like yourself who maybe, you know, working from home every day doesn't suit them, but it's actually quite a distance to travel to your place of work. So if there's a local community centre or a community hub that you can use, then that's a nice compromise. It's helping support the community, engender that community spirit, and yet it also works for you. So, you know, those are definitely positives. We have a number of clients, like I have one up in Port Stewart up in the north called the Hummingbird. Mental health issues, I think, will definitely start to surface. They already have surfaced, but I don't think the fact we're coming out of lockdown, that means that's over by any stretch of the imagination. And I think organizations like that seek to address that, I think, will become very important. And I suppose I'd like to see more of that. And if there are opportunities there for more of those organizations to spring up, then that would be great. But I think as well, lockdown has forced people, because they haven't been able to travel, to use local. And I think that shopping locally, etc., has strengthened the local communities. And, I hear my wife saying now, I'll not go to Belfast and do that. I'll not go to the larger towns. Let's support our local organisations, not all of which obviously are social enterprises, but it does breed that and strengthens that community. People are out and about more, and I think where people maybe have become a bit insular, they're now starting to think, as you say, of what's really important and what things they should really be appreciating. But certainly, I'd love to see going forward more organisations that look and that tackle mental health at source rather than trying to treat the symptoms of it, trying to nip it in the bud and cut it off at source. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things that have changed for the better and have caused people to take stock and reflect.
Mhm. I think, any organizations that promote sort of connectedness, I think that was one of the things that, just reflecting on COVID, the importance of community, the importance of connectedness. We are human creatures and we crave that connectedness. And whilst online is brilliant and it's a great solution, I think connecting in person, I think we now know that we need that, and we need it for our well-being as well as everything else, and for, a bit of crack every now and then. Those organisations that I would like to see, I suppose, coming out of this, that they're more of, I suppose, sport. Like that's a great solution for our youth, I think, for mental health. I'm not looking to see more of sport. I think maybe just sports strengthened, and maybe more widely used for all of our youth. Not every, I suppose, person is keen on team sport, but there's lots of other things that that we can avail of. Like I can think of just one of the clients that's on my books, and it's called Connacht Community Park, and they availed of finance from ourselves, and it was for just a loop walking track that's just round. I think it's a football or a Gaelic pitch in County Sligo, and that. I mean, if that's where we have to get our connectedness, if there is more problems with COVID going forward, even if it's just being allowed to meet someone safely for a walk, it certainly helps. But I do agree with you on the mental health. I think there's going to be a big fallout from that. So we'll probably need a lot more organisations. And maybe that's what some of our community groups could do as well. Maybe invite other sort of maybe volunteers that work in that sector to come in and maybe kind of co-work with them in organisations as a kind of another solution, rather than whatever, let's say it is that they originally set out to do, that this is another offering that they have. But yeah, that there's lots of opportunity, I think, out there for our community groups going forward. But I think, yeah, what COVID has taught us, we need connectedness and the importance of it all. We don't function too well without it.
A lot of the groups that we deal with, have maybe trustee boards and volunteer bases that are maybe aging, choose my words carefully, but I suppose the other hope I would have would be that with people having more time, and particularly younger people who would commute and would think nothing of a 2-hour commute, those people are now sitting at home in their front room or their study or wherever, and they're maybe gaining 2 to 3, 4 hours a day that they would have lost being sitting in a traffic jam. That time could be used to support other volunteers, and I suppose to bring a more youthful touch to many of those groups that we work with, that will secure the long-term future, rather than older people looking over their shoulders and saying, who's going to follow me in the vital work that I do. So I suppose that would be a hope I would have, that coming out of this here, that the time created by blended working will enable younger people to become more involved in those organizations.
Yeah, let's hope it kind of promotes a culture of maybe, and I know lots of people do give back, but that it becomes a way of life as opposed to, sort of being invited in and being asked to kind of participate in community projects. I think if it's, I suppose it all starts at home too, doesn't it? And schools and stuff, it's all to do with education. But yeah, if we can get, I suppose, a lot of the community groups I would deal with, and more than yourself, you probably encountered as well, that aging, I suppose, there's a word for it and I can't remember now what it is, but it's like, it's escaped me now, but it's planning really for the future, and to make sure there's people coming behind you there to take up your place on a board, or even just volunteer. It doesn't have to be you know, something I suppose specific as that, but just someone maybe even the water boy or the water girl is just as important as every other role in these community centres.